August 1945. The conflict had concluded, but for the Japanese females compressed into the rear of an Allied transport vehicle, it didn't perceive like triumph or capitulation, simply quietness. The route twisted through scorched palm vegetation and the aroma of corroded petroleum containers. They remained appendage to appendage, vision vacant, garments ripped, grasping what minimal remained of their history. One of them murmured, "They'll render us compensate." Another responded, "If we're fortunate," rapidly. But when the portals accessed, the inconceivable transpired. They weren't struck. The Allied sentinels remained motionless, weapons downward, no shouting, no disorder, simply segmented directives, descended downward, formed two formations. The females wavered. They anticipated strikes, degradation, perhaps termination. Instead, a British squad leader merely indicated to a formation of shelters. His countenance wasn't fury, it was procedure. The quiet unsettled them beyond any threat. Each progression onto that dusty terrain perceived surreal. Documentation subsequently annotated beyond 4,000 females were acquired captive across Southeast territories that year. Medical workers, administrators, transmission operators, even civilian volunteers. Most had been instructed they'd never observe compassion from the adversary. In their instruction, capitulation was more severe than mortality. Presently, that identical adversary was directing them toward nourishment and protection. The contradiction was unbearable. A youthful detainee, her designation documented as Sergeant Tanaka, glanced at the sentinel's footwear. "They don't even observe at us," she articulated. Another female expelled on the terrain, furious. "It's a deception. They'll fracture us more gradually." But the solely noise was the clatter of the portal securing behind them. One medical officer, scarcely 20, presented them containers. The females stared as though it were toxin. "You'll require it," he stated gently, not waiting for appreciation. Subsequently, that darkness, when Tanaka reclined awake, she replayed that inflection. It wasn't mockery, it was obligation. And that bewildered her beyond brutality ever could. By sunrise, they were commanded to assemble again. And Commander examined a singular terminology from a documentation board. Cleanse. Vapor hissed from a formation of bathing structures nearby, timber entrances creaking accessible. The females suspended, uncertain if this was sanitation or discipline. Tomorrow they would absorb, it was both. The dawn solar sphere struck like judgment. The females remained in rigid formations, perspiration trickling through their tattered khaki garments. A loudspeaker crackled overhead, one terminology, transparent and foreign. Cleanse. Some recoiled as though struck. Others murmured, bewildered, "Cleanse collectively." The directive resonated through the encampment again, followed by the rhythmic hiss of liquid pipes heating upward. They'd perceived rumors that Western combatants utilized showers as discipline, sometimes more severe. Every impulse screamed, "Don't trust this." But sentinels didn't elevate their weapons. Instead, they gestured tranquilly toward an extended timber structure, constructed from salvaged bamboo and metallic element. The vapor pouring outward provided it a spectral appearance, like the essence of the battlefield itself. In Japanese military civilization, terrain was a badge of devotion. During combat, combatants rarely cleansed. Purity signified sacrifice. Here, being sanitary suddenly signified compliance. One detainee articulated, "This is how they erase us." Another, a medical worker designated Keiko, attempted to convert a medical officer's English, hygiene for health. It sounded like a foreign concept, benevolence as regulation. Interior, the bathing structure, bewilderment intensified like the moisture. Collectively, the Allied medical worker reiterated firmly, "No barriers, no divisions, no positions, simply 20 females stripped of everything that once defined them." The floor surfaces were slick with cleansing agents and disgrace. Allied medical protocols from that interval demanded compulsory collective hygiene twice per week, a defense against intestinal ailments and parasite outbreaks that had eliminated thousands in earlier encampments. To the Japanese POWs, though this wasn't sanitation, it was vulnerability. Their worthiness peeled away with every droplet of liquid. One female refused to disrobe. The medical worker didn't compel her. She simply stated, "Regulations are regulations," and progressed aside. That gentleness perceived more degrading than brutality. "They handle us like population," Keiko murmured, trembling, "but we're not supposed to be." From the corner, an Allied sentinel remained silently. He appeared youthful, scarcely 20. When one fabric slipped, he rotated his cranium sharply away. No sneer, no expression, simply discomfort. And that singular human motion detonated something interior the chamber. For the initial occasion, the females observed fragility not in themselves, but in their captors, too. Vapor elevated higher, curling through illumination shafts like combustion following capitulation. Tomorrow, that one glance would alter everything. The liquid struck the floor surfaces in steady cadence, drip, splash, hiss. 20 Japanese females remained interior the bathing structure, the vapor curling around them like fog following a bombardment. Every respiration experienced metallic element and cleansing agents. The directive had been transparent collectively. No divisions, no fabric barriers, simply stripped downward uniformity in the most literal comprehension. Keiko compressed her appendages, attempting to conceal herself, but there was nowhere to hide. The Allied medical worker maneuvered through the vapor with tranquil dominance, providing each female a minor bar of carbolic cleansing agents. "Sanitate thoroughly," she stated in a vocal tone that wasn't brutal, but methodical. That inflection detached, professional perceived more severe than mockery. The Japanese females were accustomed to animosity. Detachment fractured them differently. In Tokyo's doctrine, purity arrived from suffering. Here, the adversary was compelling them to cleanse in tranquility. Their comprehension of dignity, already fractured by seizure, perceived stripped raw. Some wept silently. Others scrubbed as though discipline resided in the gesture itself. The noise of liquid slapping timber blended with muffled weeping, an orchestra of degradation. Internal Allied documentations subsequently annotated that 27% of female Japanese POWs resisted initial hygiene directives, interpreting them as degradation rituals. But the medical personnel weren't mocking. They were preventing epidemics. The confrontation wasn't physical. It was cultural, ethical, invisible. From the distant corner, the youthful British sentinel remained observation, weapon lowered. He wasn't leering. His vision remained fixed on the opposite wall. Perspiration circulated downward his temples. When one of the females dropped a fabric and suspended, anticipating amusement, he executed something nobody anticipated. He glanced away, gradually, deliberately. That singular motion rippled across the chamber like shockwave. The medical worker followed his guidance, adjusting her documentation board, vision downward. Nobody articulated, nobody expressed satisfaction. The quietness transformed disgrace into something fresh. Bewilderment, perhaps even consideration. Keiko observed it initially. "They don't observe us as trophies," she murmured. "They observe us as population." The terminology perceived perilous. She consumed them backward, but the contemplation refused to perish. When the session concluded, the females progressed exterior, garments adhering to their epidermis. The atmosphere emanated damp bamboo and burned fuel. Somewhere beyond the barrier, a provision transport vehicle rumbled inward. Tomorrow's provision delivery, they stated, but interior that transport vehicle waited another impact. One distant sweeter and distant more firm to consume. The subsequent dawn broke gray and waited, as though the atmosphere itself was uncertain what to fabricate of yesterday. The females arranged exterior their shelters, garments still damp from the cleansing. The encampment was quiet, excessively quiet. A British squad leader examined outward attendance verification, his pronunciation sharp and segmented, but there was no fury, no dominance, simply the resonance of structure. Interior the nourishment chamber, vapor elevated again. This occasion from morning nourishment containers instead of bathing conduits, grain blended with preserved legumes, something pleasant in the atmosphere. The females wavered, remembering the youthful sentinel who had rotated his vision away. His motion had unsettled them, not because it was benevolent, but because it fractured the narrative they'd been instructed to accept. The adversary was monstrous. But creatures don't blush. Creatures don't glance away. One medical worker murmured, "He couldn't even position to observe us disgraced." Another responded, "Perhaps that's the discipline, rendering us perceive human again." That contemplation persisted like combustion. Allied directive had, in actuality, allocated fresh decency guidelines across several encampments, following documentations of emotional fractures among seized medical workers and female support personnel. The directive sentinels must maintain separation, minimize contact, and handle female POWs as protected individuals beneath the regulations of conflict. For the females, those terminology converted into something more peculiar, an unexpected security. Still, trust didn't arrive effortlessly. When an Allied medical officer traversed by presenting sanitary fabrics, one detainee recoiled so firmly she dropped hers. He suspended, then acknowledged. No apology, no sympathy, simply acknowledgement. That diminutive transaction transported beyond impact than articulations ever could. Subsequently, while cleansing dishes beneath the Sentinel Tower's shadow, Keiko captured a glimpse of that identical youthful guard again. His countenance was sunburned, countenance unreadable, but this occasion she encountered his vision and didn't glance away. Two worlds, separated by conflict, paused for a fraction of a moment, and something fractured between them. When darkness descended, terminology proliferated that fresh provisions had arrived. The females murmured rumors, perhaps additional grain, perhaps cleansing agents. But when the metallic containers accessed, they discovered something they'd never anticipated from their captors, something that would rattle their satisfaction, distant deeper than any directive. The resonance of metallic element containers resonated through the nourishment formation. Vapor elevated in gentle curls, transporting the peculiar blend of grain, legumes, and something sugary. The females shuffled forward silently, metallic containers in appendage, each anticipating the experience of degradation. But when they reached the distributing surface, they suspended. Atop each nourishment platform reclined a minor square bar of confection. Allied confection, smooth, foreign, impossible. For a cardiac rhythm, nobody maneuvered. Then Keiko murmured, "It's an error." But it wasn't. The culinary operator, a middle-aged American enlisted personnel with petroleum-stained appendages, simply expressed satisfaction faintly and stated, "Consume before it dissolves." The females exchanged cautious glances. Confection was rationed even among Allied civilians. In 1945, numerous combatants hadn't observed one in lunar cycles, yet here it was, presented to detainees. A British documentation from that identical interval annotated, Allied POW provisions averaging 2,800 calories per rotation, nearly double what numerous Japanese civilians were obtaining that year. The reasoning was pragmatic. Healthy detainees caused fewer complications, but to the seized females, this generosity perceived like mockery. "We are their adversaries," one female contemplated bitterly. "Why do they nourish us like offspring?" When Keiko consumed into the confection, The experience struck like a betrayal. Pleasant, creamy, alien. Her vision stung. She had tended injured males who perished screaming for liquid. Yet here she was experiencing luxury from the identical flank that had destroyed her nation. "They desire us to forget who we are," she articulated. "But profound interior," another vocal tone murmured, "or remember what we were before the conflict." Not everyone could endure it. One female, Lieutenant Nakamura, concealed a bar beneath her sleeping surface, enclosed in fabric. Evidence, she stated to herself, that benevolence always conceals a weapon. That darkness, the aroma of cocoa, occupied the barracks, a tormenting symbol of contradiction. Adversary appendages nourishing the defeated. Exterior, beneath the lunar illumination, the youthful British sentinel from the bathing structure consumed quietly by the barrier, observing shadows maneuver behind fabric walls. He observed one silhouette, the female with the concealed confection, kneeling beside her sleeping surface. He didn't recognize it, but that secret would soon expose, immediately, how profound the psychological conflict between compassion and mistrust could traverse. Tomorrow an examination would uncover it, and instead of discipline, something distant, more peculiar would transpire. Darkness in the encampment was never authentically silent. The insects sang above the low resonance of fuel generators, and somewhere footwear crunched against stones in gradual patrol cadence. Interior Shelter 14, Lieutenant Nakamura reclined awake, vision fixed on the covering fabric, her appendage resting beneath her sleeping surface where the confection bar was concealed. That minimal fragment of pleasantness, perceived radioactive, excessively gentle, excessively perilous, excessively human. She wasn't hungry. She was waiting for the discipline that surely had to arrive. In her consciousness, this had to be an ambush, an examination of compliance, a manner to expose fragile devotion. The Japanese military had instructed one authenticity into her. Compassion from the adversary was camouflage. She repeated it like a mantra. They desire to observe what fractures us initially. But the subsequent dawn, when the Allied commander fabricated circuits, he halted at her shelter, glanced downward at the arranged covering, and observed the minor crumpled enclosure protruding outward. Nakamura suspended. The entire barrack retained its respiration. Instead of shouting, the commander crouched, retrieved the confection carefully, and departed a minor arranged annotation in its location. No sentinels, no elevated vocal tones, simply a quiet acknowledgement as he walked outward. Intervals subsequently, she unfolded the document. 4 terminology documented in coarse writing implement. Preserve it for tomorrow. That was all. No sarcasm, no reprimand. She examined it again repeatedly until the terminology obscured. Documentation from 1946 display that American-operated POW encampments documented 0 terminations for nourishment hoarding or defiance. A stunning reversal from Japanese military discipline, where even minor resistance signified mortality. Compassion was regulation presently, and for Nakamura, that compassion was more horrifying than discipline. That darkness she shared half the bar with Keiko, murmuring, "They handle us like population." Why? Keiko possessed no response. The pleasantness on their oral cavities perceived weightier than culpability. Exterior precipitation commenced to descend, saturating the assembly terrain. The British sentinel, the identical one who'd rotated away in the bathing structure, observed the females' shelters glisten beneath the lamps. He observed no rebellion, no animosity, simply quiet exhaustion. But tomorrow, the tranquility would transform again. Medical commanders were arriving for examinations, and even benevolence could perceive like another invasion. Precipitation hammered the metallic covering as sunrise fractured. A loudspeaker crackled again, this occasion announcing, Medical examination mandatory attendance. The terminology dispatched a tremor through the encampment. To the Allied personnel, it was standard. To the Japanese females, it sounded like violation, dressed as compassion. They'd already been stripped once. Presently, again. Interior the medical shelter, formations of sleeping surfaces gleamed beneath feeble illumination. Metallic instruments resonated gently. Temperature devices, cardiac monitoring devices, pressure measurement devices. For the females who'd expanded upward beneath a military that disciplined ailment as fragility, the aroma of disinfectant triggered apprehension. Keiko murmured, "They'll examine us like creatures." Nakamura stared directly ahead, her countenance vacant but her digits trembling. Then something unexpected transpired. The examiners weren't males. 3 Allied female medical workers progressed forward, crisp garments pressed, countenances tranquil. Their directives were transparent. No physical contact without consent. One medical worker expressed satisfaction, a brief flicker of humanity fracturing through protocol. "We examine for fever, nothing beyond," she stated gradually, careful with each terminology. The initial temperature device contacted epidermis. The females recoiled. No shouting followed, no mocking, simply quiet annotation acquiring, each examination documented, each symptom recorded. Documentation from Allied archives display that beyond 70% of Japanese female POWs suffered from tropical illness, parasites, or severe undernourishment. Encampment medical personnel handled them meticulously. Doses tracked, progress graphed. For the detainees, this attention perceived alien. The concept that the adversary considered whether they resided was more firm to endure than brutality. Keiko observed one medical worker, an Australian with sunburned appendages, gently apply antiseptic on a detainee's severance. "Does it cause suffering?" she inquired gently. The interrogative fractured something accessible. The female acknowledged, tears blending with antiseptic. No combatant had ever inquired if suffering caused suffering. The medical workers maneuvered like phantoms, productive, wordless, respectful. Exterior thunder circulated. When it was concluded, the detainees remained in quietness, bandaged and bewildered. Nakamura ultimately murmured, "They recover us while we still despise them." Keiko didn't respond. She didn't require to. As they departed the shelter, an administrator provided each female an envelope marked Censored Correspondence. "Correspondences from residents," he stated. The terminology suspended them mid-progression. Residence was a location that might no extended exist, and as one correspondence commenced with the terminology Nagasaki, the terrain beneath them appeared to vanish. The document perceived more slender than atmosphere, peripheries trembling in the female's appendages. Each envelope was stamped, examined by Allied censor, a minor crimson mark that somehow transported the burden of a domain. They hadn't observed handwriting from residents in beyond a year. Some grasped the correspondences without accessing them, fearful that the terminology interior would destroy the minor illusions maintaining them vital. Keiko unfolded hers initially. The pigment had bled from moisture, but she could still examine her maternal parent's designation. The correspondence was dated early August 1945 from Nagasaki. Her cardiac rhythm quickened. The converter, a youthful British enlisted personnel proficient in Japanese, approached with reluctant courtesy. "I can assist," he stated. She acknowledged, unable to articulate. He commenced examining gently. The correspondence articulated of grain shortages, aerial assaults, and aspiration that the conflict would soon conclude. Then, halfway downward the surface, his vocal tone faltered. The rotation was August 7th, 2 rotations before the atomic explosion. His subsequent terminology fractured through the shelter like thunder. "Your residence made no extended position." The entire cluster suspended. Nobody respired. They'd all perceived rumors something inconceivable had transpired in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But here, the authenticity arrived in their maternal parents' handwriting. The enlisted personnel's vision watered. He glanced away. "I'm apologetic," he murmured. The terminology sounded absurd, arriving from the adversary's oral cavity. Historical documentation validated. Beyond 70,000 eliminated instantly in Nagasaki, tens of thousands beyond in the weeks following. For the detainees, the concept that the identical banner flying above their encampment had unleashed the destruction shattered what minimal they accepted about justice. And yet the individual delivering the intelligence executed it gently, like a religious figure executing final rituals. One female dropped to her knees. Another ripped the correspondence in half, solely to grasp the fragments backward collectively, instants subsequently. Keiko didn't weep. She simply stared at the enlisted personnel's trembling appendage and stated quietly, "You instructed me my family has departed gently." That terminology gently adhered like a fragment in his moral conscience. That darkness, the encampment descended into a quietness denser than terror. For the initial occasion, animosity commenced to obscure into grief, shared, mirrored, and unspoken. The subsequent evening, from somewhere near the barracks, a faint noise elevated through the obscurity annotations, vocal tones, melody. It commenced as a murmur, gentle, uncertain, almost accidental. Several syllables resonated into the humid darkness atmosphere. Then another vocal tone participated, trembling, but steadying the initial. By the subsequent verse, even the sentinels halted their patrols to listen. It wasn't defiance or nostalgia. It was endurance, positioned to melody. From the barracks closest to the barrier, Keiko's vocal tone floated upward, transporting an antiquated Japanese lullaby her maternal parent utilized to resonate during aerial assault darknesses. The opposite females followed, blending harmonies that didn't belong to combatants or detainees, simply humans adhering to noise. Across the yard, the Allied Nourishment Chamber transmission resonated faintly. Benny Goodman. Perform, perform, perform. One cadence faded into another until the boundary between them dissolved. When the youthful British sentinel perceived it, he wavered, then positioned his weapon against the wall and remained on a vacant container. He didn't comprehend the lyrics, but he recognized the grief. From his location conflict personal record, one phrase endured. They sang like they were mourning the atmosphere itself. The encampment leader didn't halt them. Perhaps he couldn't. Perhaps he observed what the documentations subsequently validated. Encampments that permitted nightly melody intervals observed disciplinary instances decline by nearly 40%. The chorus became regulation. Therapy masked as spirit, but for the females it was beyond personal. Every annotation transported phantoms of Nagasaki, of disgrace, of bewilderment that no articulation could untangle. Keiko's lullaby faded into the subsequent composition, an English hymn the medical workers had instructed them. Abide with me. The conversion faltered, but the sentiment didn't. One detainee murmured, "We're singing their terminology." Nakamura responded quietly, "Perhaps they're singing ours." By midnight, the encampment was a peculiar harmony of adversaries, who no extended sounded like adversaries. Even the sentinels resonated gently from inflection, but sincere. Beneath the identical, leaking covering, vocal tones that had once sworn to destroy each opposite were maintaining one another awake with melody instead of terror. But tranquility interior barriers never endures. Two darknesses subsequently, that delicate bridge would be examined when someone attempted to burn it downward, not with combustion, but with fury wearing a commander's insignia. The singing had scarcely faded when dominance stormed backward inward. It arrived not through directives, but through rage, wearing medals. A seized Japanese lieutenant, once revered, presently reduced to detainee status, burst into the nourishment shelter immediately before sunrise. His garment, though ragged, still transported its insignia. His countenance burned crimson with degradation. "Adequate of this disgrace," he shouted in Japanese. The females suspended, half-nourished, and provisions in appendage. He indicated at the Allied medical worker who'd been distributing morning nourishment. "You bow to them, you sing with them, you disgrace the domain." His vocal tone fractured on that final terminology, fragment fury, fragment despair. Nobody responded. Keiko glanced upward gradually, her utensil still in mid-atmosphere. "The domain is departed," she stated gently. The phrase landed weightier than any impact. The commander traversed the chamber in 2 progressions and expelled at the medical worker's footwear. The entire encampment appeared to retain its respiration. Sentinels reached for their weapons, but the medical worker didn't maneuver. She simply cleansed her footwear with a fabric, tranquil, composed, vision steady. Her restraint rendered his fury appear minor, childlike. Historical documentation from late 1945 displays psychological fractures among seized Japanese commanders, spiking to nearly 1 in 5 as they grappled with the abandonment of dominance and dignity. Here it was unfolding, rage constructed on the ruins of a vanished structure. The lieutenant rotated on the females. "You forget who you are," he hissed. "You consume their nourishment, wear their garments, and sing their compositions." Nakamura remained. Her vocal tone was quiet, but it severed through the atmosphere like cable. "We haven't forgotten," she stated. "We've remembered what being human perceives like." That singular phrase silenced him. Even the sentinels didn't maneuver. For an instant, solely the metallic covering crackled beneath dawn precipitation. The commander's appendages descended. He glanced around, observed not traitors, but survivors, and without another terminology, he walked outward. That darkness the females assembled again. No directives, no terror, simply a selection. They transported containers of liquid to the bathing structure, the identical one where degradation had once commenced. This occasion, nobody compelled them. The determination they fabricated that darkness would rewrite everything disgrace had acquired. Lunar illumination poured across the encampment like expelled dairy, converting soil to metallic. The females maneuvered quietly, transporting metallic containers that resonated against the bamboo walkway. No sentinels commanded them this occasion. No loudspeakers shouted directives. This was their determination, a gesture neither defiance nor compliance, simply reclamation. Vapor elevated again from the antiquated bathing structure, the identical one that had once perceived like degradation itself. Presently, in the quietness of darkness, it perceived almost sacred. Keiko positioned downward her container initially. Nakamura followed, her countenance unreadable. The others formed a circular formation, igniting a singular lamp in the corner. Its flame wavered, capturing countenances that appeared senior than their years. They disrobed gradually, not because they had to, but because it was the solely manner to confront what had transpired. The initial splash of liquid resonated like memory. Keiko murmured, "This occasion, no directives." Another female responded, "No disgrace." Interior Allied documentation, 1946, marked a turning point. Disciplinary violations among female Japanese POWs declined to near zero following the introduction of voluntary standards, cleansing, documenting, even singing. What the Allies had enforced by regulation, the females had reclaimed by will. The cleansing became ritual. Cleansing agents and liquid converted into admission. They articulated quietly as they cleansed about families, forfeited metropolises, the manner grief perceived weightier in quietness. One female stated, "Perhaps we required to be fractured to observe what's remaining." Another responded, "Perhaps benevolence fractures more firmly than conflict." Exterior, the youthful British sentinel remained his customary location, perceiving faint amusement drift through the darkness atmosphere, gentle, nervous, liberated. He didn't intervene. He recognized this wasn't rebellion. It was something closer to tranquility. When they progressed outward, enclosed in coarse fabrics, the sunrise was immediately commencing to elevate above the encampment. For the initial occasion, they didn't perceive like detainees. They perceived like observers to something beyond endurance. At attendance verification that dawn, the commanding commander examined fresh directives. "All repatriation documentation commences tomorrow," he announced. The females glanced at one another, the terminology residents landing like an interrogative mark. Following everything cleansed away, what waited beyond those portals would examine them again. This occasion in tranquility. The aquatic emanated corrosion and fuel. Manila. Inlet shimmered beneath a gray sunrise as the vessels arranged upward, hulking silhouettes waiting to acquire the detainees' residence. The Japanese females remained on the pier, their minimal possessions packed in fabric containers. Allied administrators announced designations from repatriation catalogs individually as aquatic avians circulated overhead. Keiko retained her documents firmly. Her digits trembled, not from terror, but incredulity. It was concluded. Behind her, the encampment still resonated with dawn standard sentinels, altering progressions, culinary operators preparing provisions. The identical noises that once signified detention, presently perceived like peculiar comfort. For lunar cycles, these standards had been their world. Departing perceived like walking outward of a peculiar variety of security. A British squad leader approached. "Vessel departs in 20 moments," he stated. "No hostility, no sentiment, simply actuality." He provided Keiko a container and acknowledged toward the dock. She bowed slightly, a reflex she couldn't suppress. He wavered, then unexpectedly bowed backward. As they embarked, the females rotated to confront the shore. The sentinels remained in a loose arrangement, silent. Then, in an unspoken impulse, the detainees straightened and saluted not to banners, but to countenances, to the sentinels who hadn't struck them, to the medical workers who had bandaged them, to the youthful guard who had once glanced away. Documentation from Allied transport. Documentation display beyond 1,200 Japanese females repatriated through Manila by March 1946, numerous accompanied beneath Geneva supervision. For most, the journey residence was quiet, almost surreal. Aboard, they obtained sanitary garments, elementary nourishments, and vacant notebooks to document whatever they required to forget. Keiko documented solely one phrase: "We saluted those who cleansed us." As the vessel's machinery rumbled to vitality, the encampment contracted into an obscurity of pale shelters and gesturing silhouettes. Some females wept openly. Others stared at the horizon in quietness. Behind them reclined a contradiction detention that had humanized them beyond than their own nation ever possessed. The wind transported the faint aroma of saline and cleansing agents, reminders of everything departed behind. Ahead waited Japan, ruins, judgment, and a residence that might no extended recognize them. And when they arrived, they'd absorb that liberation can sometimes perceive more frigid than detention. Japan appeared more diminutive than they remembered. From the vessel's platform, Keiko observed the coastline obscure through a fog that emanated cinders. The conflict had concluded, but the atmosphere still transported its phantom charred timber, collapsed rooftops, the quiet of a nation attempting to forget itself. When they disembarked, nobody celebrated. No musical groups, no banners, simply officials in gray garments stamping, documents with vacant countenances. "Designation?" one administrator articulated. Keiko Tanaka, she responded gently. He paused, glanced at the crimson POW mark on her documentation, and glanced away. Proceed. That singular terminology instructed her everything. She wasn't returning as a citizen, she was returning as a stain. Tokyo's debris murmured narratives of endurance, but not of compassion. Families of POWs were instructed to remain discreet to avoid embarrassing the nation. The Ministry of Welfare's 1946 directive labeled repatriated combatants and laborers as disgraced personnel, their dignity suspended until further annotation. For females, the disgrace doubled, seized, nourished by the adversary, cleansed by foreign appendages. Keiko reunited with her maternal parent in a single chamber protection near Shinjuku. The antiquated female didn't inquire interrogatives, simply distributed grain soup and stared at her offspring's garment. "You endured," she stated quietly. But when Keiko attempted to portray the encampment, the cleansings, the confection, the correspondences, her maternal parent's countenance compressed. "Don't articulate of it," she murmured. "Population won't comprehend." Rotations obscured into lunar cycles, the females encountered occasionally, discreetly, to exchange fragments of intelligence. Some discovered labor as medical workers again. Others married in quietness, never exposing where they'd been. One, Lieutenant Nakamura, vanished completely. Rumors stated she participated in a medical facility for conflict widows in Osaka, refusing to wear her garment ever again. One winter darkness, Keiko remained alone on the floor, unwrapping a diminutive parcel she'd concealed through customs. Interior reclined the arranged annotation from the Allied commander. "Preserve it for tomorrow." She stared at it for an extended duration, then propelled it between the surfaces of her personal record. She documented beneath it, "Tomorrow never arrived, but I'm still sanitary." Decades would elapse before anyone else examined those terminology. Until then, their narrative would exist underground, buried beneath the quietness of endurance. Autumn 1989. Tokyo had altered neon illuminations, transparent material structures, the resonance of an economy reborn from cinders. But interior an antiquated timber residence on the metropolis's periphery, a granddaughter sanitizing her grandmother's storage container discovered something enclosed in yellowing fabric. A notebook, faded, tied with cord, surfaces brittle as memory. On the covering, Keiko Tanaka, 1945-46. She accessed it gently. The initial phrase halted her frigid. "They rendered us cleanse collectively." The phrase sounded almost scandalous until she maintained examining. Beneath it, surface following surface of delicate handwriting, instructed everything Japan had never desired to perceive. The terror, the degradation, the compassion, the confection, the melody, the quiet recovering that expanded between detainees and captors. Her grandmother had never articulated of the conflict. To the family, she'd simply been in assistance overseas. But here was evidence of another authenticity, a documentation of decency enduring interior devastation. When the granddaughter converted the personal record for a regional museum, curators were skeptical. Then chronologists validated the designations, the encampment, the British medical formation. Every phrase matched archived documentations. Today, that personal record rests in the Tokyo Tranquility Museum, exhibited beneath transparent material, beside an annotation documented in Keiko's subsequent appendage. They rendered us cleanse collectively, but what they cleansed away wasn't worthiness, it was animosity. Thousands examine each year, numerous walking outward in stunned quietness. The granddaughter remembers the rotation of the exhibition's accessing. A former British medical worker attended, pale follicled, delicate, transporting her own faded photograph from the identical encampment. She remained before the personal record and murmured, "We solely executed what we were instructed." Then she wept. For decades, official chronologies designated the Pacific conflict, a confrontation of metallic and ideology. But this personal record exposed something deeper, the quiet conflict engaged between brutality and moral conscience. It displayed that compassion, when minimum deserved, could disarm entire militaries of conviction. As visitors document beyond the transparent material enclosure, they pause at Keiko's final notation. If tranquility signifies never despising again, then I capitulated happily. Exterior the museum, Tokyo roars, transportation vehicles, vocal tones, the cardiac rhythm of a metropolis that forgot and remembered all at once. What endures conflict isn't triumph. It's humanity documented in a female's appendage on a surface that refused to fade.